excited to talk about Genesis 4 today, which, as parents might not be the best story for you, especially if you have siblings that you're trying to teach. This is the story, of course, where Cain kills Abel, which we hear is the very first murder of the whole Bible. This is, of course, a really hard story coming right on the heels of the first sin of Adam and Eve. But here we see two brothers that bring gifts to God. This is actually one of the most difficult stories probably to talk about, but also it's one of my most interesting stories to think about. This really sets up a good theological basis for how we think about sin, especially how we sin against others. We hear, of course, in Genesis 1 and 2 that God's earth is good, and Adam and Eve listened to the serpent and betrayed that. But the original message of Genesis is that Adam and Eve would rule and subdue the animals and the creatures of the earth on God's behalf. And so it's so interesting that only 4 chapters into the Bible, we hear God telling Cain in verse 7, "If you do well, Cain, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at its door, its desires for you, and you must master it." Now, isn't that interesting that humans are supposed to rule and subdue, but here we are with sin kind of in animal form, trying to thirst and trying to desire humanity, trying to hunt humanity. And so, what an interesting thing that Cain is overcome, right? Is overcome by sin, and he murders Abel. And the most interesting part of this whole story to me, and the most powerful part of this story to me, is when God comes and confronts Cain. He says, "What am I, my brother's keeper?" And in verse 10, the Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground." Of course, this is now the second sin story that we get in correspondence to the ground. But this is actually a famous quote that is hanging at the end when you walk through the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. This quote, "Listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground," at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And so what an interesting way to frame our discussions about what's going on in the world right now. Our discussions about police violence, about police brutality, the ways that we treat our neighbors and our strangers, even how we talk about systematic racism. What if we talk about it from the lens that this world, this nation, has bloodstains from slavery? Wouldn't that be such an interesting way to frame this story? That our brothers are not just our blood brothers in our family that live in our homes, but they're the brothers of different colors of people around the world. And so as we talk about this with our families, I wish that as families we can talk about what does it look like to love our brothers in our household? What does it look like to love our brothers in our community? And what does it look like to love brothers in our country and our world? And with these concentric circles, we can really frame this story. We'll see you next